report for the the February revenue report. We're at 207,641, and that will go up a little bit also. I just received the final bill from Lafayette College on the Thanksgiving Day game, so now I will finish that report. I have already received Phillipsburg's. I'll put that together in the next few days, and it's amazing, but that takes this long. That folder sits on my desk for about 10, 11 months out of the year, so I'll have that in your hands shortly. Special event revenue, again, anticipate 30,000. We're at roughly 28.4. That comes from a variety of things there. Football, we anticipate 130,000 revenue. We're at 150, and again, that does not include Thanksgiving Day yet. Wrestling season tickets, anticipate 25,000. We only brought in about 15. Wrestling is an animal in itself, and Coach will tell you, when we don't have Nazareth at home, and that's not a big match, or some of these other big matches, that's where our revenue will go down. Some years you have some of those big matches in your home gym, some are away, and this year we seem to have some of those big ones away, so hopefully next year that'll go up a little bit more. Girls basketball almost made it to their revenue with a brand new coach in place, and boys basketball again just fell short of their anticipated revenue projection again with the brand new coach there. Okay. Next slide. Spring, they're the teams that we have going right now. I don't have those figures yet. Rosters are just being finalized. All cuts are made now. We just started competing. And I walked the campus today, and I think the last bit of snow is gone. And we have baseball going on today, softball, and volleyball. Last slide, I believe it is, sports medicine. Again, had 3 physicians from St. Luke's on those 2 physical exam days. We physical examined roughly 500 athletes for the spring, brought in about $3,400 from that fee again, and I will fill the rest in probably in late May or June board meeting and update you on the spring season. That is the conclusion of the winter athletic season. If you have any questions, be sure to answer them. Okay, Mr. Cup will go over some of the GPAs and that's staff.
As they're walking out, I want to offer my congratulations to the athletes who are recognized for not only their athletic achievement but also their academic achievement. As reported in the fall, the student athletes here at East Senior High School do an outstanding job in season and out of season with their academics, because we emphasize very specifically to our student athletes that they are a student athlete. And so they take very much pride in their hard work and dedication, not only as an athlete, but more so as a student as well. And humble as well. Only Seton Hall, only Penn State, only looking at NYU, and some of these other factors. I wish I was in that sort of scenario when I was in their shoes. But to say the least, congratulations to them and Coach Powell and all their accomplishments from the season. What I tried to do is continue to keep it consistent with what we had, or what I had reviewed with you back in the fall. So when we look at that first slide, we have a comparison of basically the students who are participating in athletics and then the students as the class as a whole. Mr. Kruksak presented some figures to you that had students at the onset of the season that also included grades 7 and 8 with the middle school athletics. So some of these numbers are lower, obviously, than some of those other projections, which include JV and varsity athletes in particular. In participation in terms of 9th grade, 75 in the junior high JV varsity programs. Those students participating in athletics, 86% cumulative grade point averages for their class, only 81%. Student athletes in grades 10 participating in winter athletics, 89% average GPA. Athletes of their fellow classmates, 82%. 11th grade students, 87%. Student athletes, 82% as a class as a whole. And then in 12th grade, it's very consistent, 87%, 83% as a whole for their classmates in that particular grade level in the respective class. Slightly lower than the fall. Also, participation is slightly lower than the fall, but only by a percentage or two in those particular areas with those teams. The next slide basically summarizes all of the athletes that participated. 87% was the average GPA of those athletes. The JV varsity average was 87, and I also included this time around junior high GPAs because we don't have as much participation this time around, where the fall is a very large participation of student athletes, and we didn't really even take a look at junior high sports. It's also important to note that junior high in particular that were noticed here are ninth graders. Some of our junior high programs have 8th grade students. That data was not included. But 86 for a student athlete in one of the toughest years of high school, and that is their transition here in 9th grade, is significant, and it means students are doing the academic work that's necessary to be successful in the classroom, but more in particular, successful in life. So that's a very good percentage, considering in 9th grade, that average hovers around 80% because it's a big transition year for those students and those student athletes. So they're handling their commitments well. The next slide, another kind of wrap up here, and it is the winter, it's not the fall, but athletes at 90% or better were 40%. Fall athletes with 100% or better, or winter athletes rather, or 5%, and 3 teams had over 60% of the team with 90% or better GPAs. Looking at the fall, that number is slightly lower, but 86 out of 213 that have a 90% cumulative GPA or better is extremely significant. If you look at grade 9 now, only 35% of the student body has a 90% or better, 31 in grade 10, 28 in grade 11, and around 25% in grade 12 have a 90% or better GPA. When we're looking at the athletes, it's up 40% of those students. So some statistics that I think are extremely important. Going back to the reason why we began to look at this data specifically was some perceptions that student athletes weren't carrying their weight academically, and that is simply not the case. They are absolutely carrying their weight. I appreciate the work of the athletic department and the coaches to maintain this academic rigor and emphasize the importance of being a student athlete. The other thing that I think is extremely important that Mr. Kutsak reviewed earlier is that our students, and I just forgot what I was going to say. And help me here. The ineligibility. I tell you what, Mr. Stephan, it's strong support. When you look at those numbers, and I looked at them, Mr. Kutsak sent me the slide yesterday, I looked at them just real quick. And I really honed in on them today as they flash them on the screen again. You're talking 200 plus the middle school kids, another 200 kids participating in athletics. And you're looking at 9, 5, 3, 2, 1 student ineligible per week. That's these are averages and they're important to notice. But it's also the fact that kids are staying where they need to be, and sports and athletic programs are motivating them to do what they need to do in the classroom. And that's what we're looking to accomplish. Questions from board members? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Irby?
At this time, we'd like to have any public comments. Seeing none. Thank you for presenting, Mr. Kosh, Mr. P. For a summary, as our winter sports is coming to an end, going into the spring sports, we're looking forward to keeping these grade percentages as they are, maybe even better, and that's about it.
Thank you. In the absence of Mrs. Ellison regarding our policy committee report, I'll try and direct through this with our first presentation, Mr. Freund, on policy 140 on charter schools.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reinhardt. we have an existing policy 140 that was originally adopted, and as far as I can see from our policy notebook, has not really been amended since 2007. Of course, charter school law hasn't particularly stood still since that time. Nevertheless, our policy is a rather bare bones affair that sets out primarily our legal obligations, and with respect to Mr. Anderson's suggestions, I wish we could unilaterally write them in here, but we can't. So there were a couple of things that it's felt that ought to be touched up. One sort of aspirational thing in the beginning, the original policy said that the board shall work cooperatively with individuals and groups submitting proposals. Suggested that be eliminated, not so much as a mechanism or a suggestion of obstruction, but rather as a reminder that the resources that are paid to charter schools are precious, and that that some rigor needs to be attached to the review of their applications and an analysis of the projected success of their programs. On the second page, in some of my other school clients, we're seeing multiple submissions of revised applications, and in that process, school board members have raised the question of what's going on here. The school code actually provides that upon the declination of a charter applicant's application, that they can submit a revised application, but it doesn't say how many applications they can submit. It doesn't give much guidance at all in that regard. So we've suggested that we amend the policy in the second full paragraph to say that each charter school applicant is permitted to resubmit one revised application. And we think that that's a reasonable regulation that has a good chance of being recognized and honored and upheld in the courts if necessary. Also, the next paragraph, again, very small recommendation there is to add the notation that the initial term of first charter is within the board's discretion, to underline the fact that the initial charter shall be for 3 to 5 years. Charters after that are mandatory 5 years. And pretty much the rest of the policy remains as is. I've reviewed it, my staff has reviewed it, and it still pretty much represents the law as applies to charter schools. So that's what we have at this point, unless someone has some suggestions for some areas they think ought to be added to this policy that would be helpful. That's what we have at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board, suggestions?
I got a kind of dumb question on the transportation.
Okay.
Why is it a requirement that the district provide transportation to a charter school on days when the district is not holding school?
Do you want a dumb answer?
Yes.
It happens to be the correct answer because it says so. Because that's what the statute says.
I know, I read the statute, but is there any way around that? For example,
Yes. Yes, there is a way around it.
Okay.
There is a way around it. And the way around it is to pre-negotiate the charters, which we do regularly. In fact, I think that the charter that we dealt with a little earlier, that Kelly Collins in my office, who's becoming quite versed at this, did in fact provide for a charter condition to the effect that we would not have to transport days when we were not in school. The law also is supportive to the effect that if in fact there's mutual agreement on charter conditions and they're not otherwise violative of the law, that they will be enforced. So that's the way to do it.
Okay.
But it is quite an onerous requirement, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Very good, thank you. Mr. Castavicci, could you lead us through policy 539 on uncompensated leaves?
Yes, my favorite topic.
Yes.
Mr. Reinhardt directed me to work with Mr. Freund's office on some revisions to policy 539 on compensated leave. And we've done that, and I was looking at the policy and kind of finalizing some things, and I was thinking, geez, this policy is very short. It's about 1 page long, and it's not very prescriptive, but I think, that's done intentionally to allow the administration maximum latitude to apply the policy fairly to employees. At least that's my view. I'll go over the changes, and then if there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them. Under period of leave, we've added a section that says all leave time must be used concurrently with leave time taken under the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, when FMLA is applicable. Most employers, most school districts do this. Easton has not. Essentially, if an employee intends to take a leave of absence, we can charge that time off towards their FMLA time. Correct, Mr. Freund?
Yes, that's correct.
That's basically what we're saying. So there will be no double dipping. There will be no taking sick days and then 12 more weeks of FMLA time.
That's correct. Easton is in the extreme minority how it was handled.
Under commitment of employer, we added at the expiration of the leave, only where required by law or contract, the employee shall be offered the same position previously held or a like position to that previously held. Otherwise, the employee's position upon returning from leave remains in the sole discretion of the board. So essentially, if in a contract it states that you get your position back upon your return from leave of absence, we would follow the contract language. If it does not state that in a contract language, the administration would have sole authority to place you where they need to place you. Under enforcement, the last item, when an employee's absenteeism exceeds the employee's leave entitlement, the employee shall be subject to discipline up to and including termination from employment. Most recently, that's what Mr. Reinhardt has asked me to do, is to step up the efforts to meet with employees, to counsel them, to talk to them when they are at risk of exceeding their leave entitlement. And that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing recently, meeting with employees, having face-to-face meetings, trying to figure out why it is that they need to miss work, why they need to be away from work, to guide them into as far as what they have available, whether it's sick days or personal days, and when they run out of that time, to talk about options. But I always do document those meetings in writing, and sometimes it does lead to employee discipline. So we are stepping up our enforcement efforts to try to get employees to attend work more regularly. Any questions?
Questions, anyone?
I just had a comment. Under the enforcement area, how, I don't want to use the term like clean, but how clean is that where we won't see any potential for an issue on our part as the district? If somebody is, if their leave is going to require some extra time and it's not a situation that doesn't have any merit.
Could you repeat that? I missed the beginning.
Are we going to be okay threatening termination for somebody who's exceeded their leave? I guess is what I'm asking.
You're worried about like legal repercussions.
Right. If an extenuating circumstance comes up and...
Well, Mr. Reinhardt and I actually were having that very discussion today, and I think, we need to work together. We need to apply the policy fairly to all employees, and that's where I come in, making sure that we're not treating, employee A differently than employee B, that we're being fair. And we always do consult with our attorney when we're looking at a potential recommendation to terminate, because he ultimately needs to support it as he's going to be defending it. If it would turn into an arbitration hearing or something worse,
If I could add to that, John. Baron, yeah, we did look at this, that exact question, and I know that both John and I were concerned that the standard here is a little bit vague, but there's such a universe of different circumstances this thing applies to, and everything from, somebody having to take a family member to deal with some kind of emergency, to people who are perhaps more abusive of their privileges over a period of time. And rather than try to sit down and figure out all different circumstances and how to deal with them, I think that the thought was that to the extent that Mr. Reinhardt now is more focused on this, let's put this in here as a kind of a reminder of what needs to be done, and try to deal with these cases on an individual basis that will not only show the importance of not overextending your accumulated time, but also showing some compassion and reasonableness with respect to the employee. And I think as those things develop, there may be the opportunity to develop more specific criteria or categories of treatment for those different kinds of situations.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Captain. Appreciate it. The next policy is policy 707.1, which is the use of district facilities for before and after school childcare. And I believe that at one of our most recent meetings, we discussed the possibility of opening up our schools for before and after childcare in more schools than what we currently have. We have some opportunities, I believe, at 2 of our buildings. And quite frankly, over the summertime, after coming on board, one of the most frequently asked questions from parents was, will the district be offering this opportunity for parents in other buildings? And the other question asked is, can I take advantage of the opportunity that's available at March if I live in another attendance area? And so, after having a brief conversation with Carrie and with Joan and other board members, it was found that this conversation basically ended, the conversation about before and after school care, it ended, and it wasn't necessarily something that was picked up for whatever reasons following that. And I had, and Carrie, both of us thought we would like to present the policy, discuss the policy, because in spite of our financial circumstances, there is a strong possibility that we could offer these services to parents at little or no cost to the school system. And not only is it a service for parents, but it's also a tremendous advantage for learning for our children, because they would have opportunities for organization and gathering and first thing in the morning, but most importantly, providing after-school care, homework, support, and learning opportunities for students in an organized fashion after school with their friends in a safe and secure environment. So, with that introduction, Carrie, I was wondering if is there anything that you wanted to add to this before the changes to the policies are pretty significant. So, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Well, the changes that we had been looking at, and it's been almost 2 years since we really brought this up. there were concerns regarding the fee structure, things in regards to that, and what that would look like to a potential after-school care program, as far as if an organization came in and was providing that service for us. These fee structures would be very overwhelming in some circumstances for them. So I had today spoken with one of the CEOs of a local that actually is a person that provides childcare for after school in Forks. Lehigh Valley Childcare.
Yes.
And the CEO of that organization just gave me the information that, you know, she still would like to have an opportunity to look this policy over with us as far as the fee structure and talk about how it could or wouldn't work for them if it comes into play. She also mentioned to me that in Nazareth, they do provide the same program at no cost. There's no cost to the district, and there's no cost to them. They just provide a service that they set a fee, and the parents pay that fee. Then she also mentioned in Allentown, they have a similar contract with them. They do provide the service, but they need to pay for any utilization of extra electricity and heat.
Heat, yeah, utilities. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are different scenarios. She doesn't have any district that they are providing services to that charge something above and beyond that. So I think that it's important if we really want this program in our schools, I think we really need to look at it very seriously as to whether we need to do some significant changes to the proposal here. And I don't know, Mike, you might have some thoughts about that. And maybe other people on the board have some thoughts. I just did some research today, so.
Yeah, I'll just add that this was a couple of years when I first came here, we were talking about that and we put it on the shelf. But at that time, and I was able to resurrect all those spreadsheets, all of that information. At that time, we were talking about charging for the area of the building, just as a regular fee structure for other organizations using the building. And we added the cost for utilities and did square footage calculations. What I'd like to suggest is that maybe I sit down, I'd like to see that information that you had, those type of contracts that you received.
And I didn't actually receive them.
Okay.
We talked about them over the phone, and she was going to share them with me, but, when I downloaded my computer, I wasn't at home, so.
Would do you think it would be appropriate to give me that contact and I can reach out to her? And...
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. And then maybe I could sit down with Mr. Reinhardt.
Jane Irvin?
It wasn't Jane Irving, the person that I spoke with, Susan Wilson.
Okay. Yeah, I know that name.
Yeah.
As well, so, yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I can give her the contact, and I think Sue Ferretti has the contact information also.
Okay.
Because I got it from her at one point
All right.
today.
And I'd like to sit down with Mr. Reinhardt, go through what we bring up to speed from a while ago,
Yeah.
and just look at the different options on what we want to do, what we
Okay.
want to charge or not charge, and bring both scenarios to the board for discussion.
I'd like to hear if there's any thoughts as far as other board members right now in regards to this type of a program for after school, just so that we know where we're going as we move forward.
Right.
Are there any thoughts currently that people have?
I just think it's great. I think it's very important for the kids to have that kind of program. And the sites that I've worked at that have after school and before school programming really makes a difference.
Okay.
I've got a comment. So I know that there were discussions about a potential program in March not too long ago.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of parents in that community were disappointed that there's not one currently. So I think it's a great idea. I do have a specific question about the policy. Can I ask that now, or should we wait?
No, well, I would say get any of the questions out, because perhaps in conversations with this woman that I spoke with and other people that provide, we might be able to get some answers as to how it would work.
Well, this is more for us
Yeah,
operating.
okay.
So on page 3, under the fees, so the second paragraph on the page that's in green, if we have a cost for the building to be open, why would we give a 501c3 a lower cost than we would, say, a private company to run a before or after school program there? Why wouldn't we just have a fee to run the building or to have the program there? It's going to cost us the same.
I think from my recollection, this was put in there partly because the fee structure was a little bit.
Sure.
In addition to that, we were trying to clarify, okay, so if you're a nonprofit, then would there be some...
I know a lot of nonprofits where the people make a lot more money than in private companies, right?
I think it wasn't, this policy was, the 771 was to be, I think looked at as just a separate policy
Yeah.
and assign our own fees to that regardless of the 707 policy for the other building use. So that's something that we can, and then again, it's up to the board, one fee structure, profit, not-for-profit, a 501c3, and just make it one fee structure if that's the determination.
Right now, that's really the only issue I have with the policy as it's been written.
Okay.
And I concur with that because that was one of the issues early on as well. That having one fee structure, because the cost of a room in a building is the cost of a room. It doesn't change based on who's running it or anything else. It is the cost.
Would there be any liability for insurance purposes if a child gets hurt or anything happens on our property?
Well, they will provide insurance. They're an organization. They provide, like other people using our buildings, they have to provide a certificate naming the district as additional insured. And I guess we're always liable, but they would have to prove that it was our negligence and not theirs.
So then I think that basically, some of the question marks that we had originally were the fee structure thing, but how this would fit into a before and after school care program. So if we could move forward and look at that part of it and see if we can come up with some resolutions.
Absolutely.
Good. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any public comment on any of the policy agenda items? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I'd like to echo the comment from a couple of gentlemen. I don't think there's a very equitable basis to say that one client using a school should be charged more or less than another. And 501c3, I happened to work for one for a while, and my boss made a hell of a lot more money than the first 10 or 12 people across the front table. I didn't, he did. So certainly, whatever it costs, that's your number. Mr. Simonetta, I hope you're aware that you may lose your transportation subsidy when you allow people to use the building before and after school. Because obviously they're not going to be riding the bus. As an equitable and honest manner, of course, you wouldn't want money for people who don't ride the bus. So I hope you factor that into your costs. I'll help you if you don't.
Luckily, the State Department has already adjusted that formula, and it's kind of been frozen at a few years ago level. So,
in other words, we pay for students who don't ride the bus.
we pay for students that don't ride the bus.
You get reimbursed for students
Right.
who don't ride.
Right. But that those levels of reimbursement have been frozen at.
Oh, that's not my question. If instead of having 150 students get on the bus at the end of the day, you only have 105, then your reimbursement formula times the per pupil rate would drop,
I understand.
which you should be adding back into your factor. Because a prior superintendent told me not to worry because we're only wasting state money. And he went on to become superintendent of something else, but it's not free money. So we got to be good stewards of the money no matter where it is. before your time, I think the board voted its heart and not its brains to not approve certain charter schools. As a result, we got billed at the end by a deduct. I think that caused Mr. Simonetta some problems. If it's still a problem, maybe we should revisit that so that you're in the loop as early as you can be for whenever it helps you. You understand my question? The records access, when I listened to the superintendent of one of the other charter schools comment about what he wouldn't give you, I was horrified. Your access to the records of the charter school, I would suggest as aggressively as you can, put it in there with due process so that if Mr. Simonetta, your Director of Pupil Personnel Services, requests a record and they say no, you give them a polite repeat. And if there's more than one repeat, somebody goes and says, here's your charter, it's now canceled, try again. And I realize that you can't do certain things, but you can at least try, because they're hiding behind, not McGinley, Buckley, and saying they can't share certain data with you, which you're responsible to take care of, student absences, truancy. They're not sharing the affidavits with you, I don't believe. You haven't gotten them yet, have you? Nope, haven't gotten them. There's a lot of things that the charter schools are not doing that, hey, those are the rules. You ought to be as tight as you possibly can, as tight as your solicitor can help you make it. My problem with some of your stuff is you're not clear enough. So the push comes to shove, you've created an ambiguity. It at least ought to be crystal clear that, Mr. Charter, you didn't follow A, B, and C. Your charter is now in suspension. Go argue it in the courts. You just haven't done your homework well in the past. I would encourage you to do more if possible. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I apologize for going over the item on the district advertising policy, but that's a policy that's kind of in progress. Do we have a status update on that by any chance? Yep.
We've taken an initial look at it, and John, we've had some discussions. I think one of the points where we're probably going to have a broader discussion and a little more research is how, if at all, we want to differentiate the different facilities and levels of grade levels with respect to what type of advertising can be done at these various places. And that's going to take a little more discussion, a little more research. One of the things that has occurred in the legal community, for better or mostly worse, and we're part of that, I certainly am a big part of it in a couple of cases, is that some of the First Amendment law in this circuit has changed significantly with regard to schools. And that makes it, I think, more incumbent upon those who structure these policies to anticipate what the how to protect, say, some of the more fragile grade levels and facilities that we don't want necessarily exposed to the harshness of the unmitigated marketplace of ideas. If you didn't get my meaning. And so it's in progress. We're looking at it. It's going to be a little bit of a task to come back with a suggestion for that. But we just don't want to be able to advertise any kind of anything anywhere. And the law is at this point that, for example, if, say for example, in a baseball stadium or something like that, in a high school, you may have things that are just totally inappropriate to an elementary school. However, the current state of the law is such that it's a high risk that you'll be able to stop that unless you have a properly structured policy that strictly designates forums for different levels of kids in public and that type of thing. We're working on it.
Would you prefer that the board have that public discussion, like scheduled for over the next 3 or 4 weeks to help you to write that policy? I mean, how else would we know what the board as representatives of the community would like to have, where they feel the policy should go, without having that conversation?
That's fine. I mean, I think that what we need before that is at least to put something down, some kind of working document,
Okay.
rather than have just a
Free-flowing.
a free-for-all, because then the question becomes, such as, question that was posed to the court in the so-called AK case, which was in Pocono Mountain, that with regard to certain community-based communications, that elementary settings should be treated differently than other settings, and the court found that there should be no distinction. I don't think a lot of people agree with that. I don't think that would have community support in a lot of ways. So, I mean, we can throw together something in a couple of weeks that would provide a basis for discussion.
Good.
But otherwise, just kind of general philosophical back and forth.
Good. All right. So what we have here as a result of our conversation tonight, policy 40 is going to be placed on the agenda at our next meeting for first reading. Policy 539 on uncompensated leaves will have the first reading. We're going to further define policy 707.1, use of district facilities, as well as the advertising policy. And both of those will be and should be back on the docket for conversation when we meet again. So that, I think, is the summary for this part of the agenda. Anything else for policy, under policy from board members?
Thank you
Yes.
for taking over.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sure. Absolutely. Public to be heard on non-agenda items. Is there anyone that would like to come forward to be heard on anything in particular this evening? Yes.
Sign in, state your name, right?
Right. Raise your right hand.
My name is Debbie James, and I live in Forks. And I would like to say, as I look around the room, I think I'm the only person here aside from, what's your name again? That's here in a non-administrative capacity. And that's pretty sad. Oh, and 2 more people maybe, or 3. But that's pretty sad. And although we seem to get the ball rolling on support, it seems you have fallen off the side of the road. So hopefully you'll, and I appreciate the effort to move the meetings to different spots, as Mr. Pintabone said he would do, and here we are. So hopefully next time you'll see more people. And I also had a question about the community school. Can I ask that now? So what kind of, would that mean the school is open more time? Is it just during the regular school hours, or would it be longer?
It's primarily during the regular school hours at this time. If we move forward with any measures, with any type of in-house medical facility or something like that, that would be something long down the line. Then you could look at something being open outside of school hours. They'll also look to bring in after-school programs or supplement the current after-school programs, but it would be primarily during school hours, just supplement for certain families.
Okay. So then public people, like parents and whoever, would be allowed to come in during those hours, during school hours?
Depending on how well the resource does, but that it's primarily for the students and then just linking families to any types of resources.
Okay, thank you.
There's like a philosophical overarching concept that the buildings, the schools are public buildings and should be used as much and as frequently as possible for the community in general, the community it serves. And so, some cases, if there's an adult evening class that wants to form, sponsored by the community college, let's say, that they may want to have that during the evening at the school, we would try to make it open and keep the facility open so that people could walk and come in and do those kinds of things.
At a room rate.
Pardon me?
At a rate. At a building rate.
Well, we don't. The community college is an agency we don't charge because we're a member institution.
Okay. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Sorry. I'm Christine LaFontana, PTA president at March Elementary. I just wanted to touch base about the after-school care. I'm glad that the board is looking into this policy because we had you in February come, and we were hoping to have the board come again in May, and this was going to be on our agenda because, like Matt said, we have a lot of parents who keep asking the PTA to try to push with this after-school program. And I just want to thank you for putting this back on because this was going to come up from parents and questions to the board and we were going to invite you back to March. So thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? One other item of business for the board is that I believe we're going to need to put on the agenda for our regular meeting a replacement for Mr. Monahan for the CIT. And Mr. Obi has indicated an interest and willingness to fill that position if there's no objection. We would like to make sure that we keep our representation there steady and forward moving. So, would that be acceptable to have that placed on the agenda for the next meeting? Is that okay with everybody? Okay, very good. If there's no further business, I guess our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.